Welcome to the State of the Black Men's Mental Health, and I'm your host, Purge Benjamin. And some of y'all are gonna probably be confused by me saying Purge and not Page, because the panel today only knows me by Purge. So I was trying to reduce the level of confusion. But with that being said, hey, I'm Purge / Page Benjamin of Get My Cheese Back on My Cracker. And in this episode, we're gonna talk about good men, good Black men. Um, Setting up this conversation, one of our panelists, we really was having a nice chop up and really talking about what good Black men look like, right? And the conversation was so dope that I was like, you know what, let me hold that off for when we get on. But when it comes to being good men, good Black men, to me, it's all about the person you are, the character that you present. But at the same time, we can't help how people perceive us. A lot of times you hear, oh, there aren't any good Black men out there. And, that could be true for some people because their criteria are different from what some of us as good Black men tend to believe in ourselves, right? Now, I'm also going to say the fact that it's November 19th after the November 17th for the greatest organization in the world, Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated. Founders Day was on the 17th. I wanted to make sure we brought this month in amazingly. Earlier this month, we had a conversation with the Young Brothers. And so we had an episode called The State of the Black Man's Mental Health at a PWI, predominantly white institution. And how does that have an impact on us as Black men at these institutions and how we're treated and if our needs are being met? So if you haven't caught that yet, go back to our YouTube, check our podcast for the latest episode, and you'll hear how some of these amazing young men talk eloquently about how their needs weren't being met or how they realized that life just changed for them entering college. So with that being said, I want to bring on my panel of good Black men. The first person that I'm going to bring on, I'm not going to lie to you, the nicest gentleman in the world. It's not you, the other person that's on there. But, from the time he expressed interest to the man he's become today, I've only seen nothing but positive things about this gentleman. Now, once again, these are my criteria of what a good man is. Not only is he a good man, he's a good military man. He's a good healthcare provider. He's a good person all around. And you know what? I'm going to bring him on stage so he can introduce himself. Sir, good sir, introduce yourself to the folks.
Hey, how y'all doing? I'm Steve Opara. I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. As Purge alluded to, I'm in the military. I'm a combat medic as well as a healthcare provider with the VA healthcare system.
Awesome, good brother. This is always a pleasure to have a conversation with you, and we touched on a lot of amazing things earlier before we came on air. So I really want to start tapping on some of those things, but I'm gonna bring in this another brother. Now, this other brother, you guys have seen him before. He's probably gotten himself in some trouble for his first episode, and then he redeemed himself on an episode on how Black men love. Listen, he was talking about how women loved on him all his life. And, he had his ups and downs, but that's what being vulnerable and being honest with your growth comes in, right? So we're going to bring this brother on here real quick. Brother, can you reintroduce yourself to the audience? He has a very deep voice, so, don't let that fool you. But go ahead, brother. Introduce yourself.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? Russell Cox. I'm a brother of Omega Psi Phi. I am absolutely a dad and a husband, and I'm a manager at EY.
Okay. And we got one more brother coming in now. This brother is all the way in Abu Dhabi, and he's on his way to his hotel to get checked in. So we're gonna weigh him. We're gonna tag him in as soon as he jumps on. But I want to start the conversation with what does being a good man mean to you guys? Like, this is like, for you, Steve, for you, Russ, being a good man is what?
So me personally, I'll say being a good man or being a good human in general is just about listening to that moral compass that you have inside you in all aspects of life. I know the journey that I've been on, I've been seeking a lot of balance through the years, and I'm just starting to find it, like, being able to balance that good and that bad, or that light side and that dark side. But to be honest, just as long as I'm following that moral compass, that entails me being a good man, and whatever decisions I make, just kind of leading with the light and not showing up in a way that I deem unnecessary or bad.
Mm, Ross, I see you pondering a soliloquy. What you got for us, sir?
This is a tough one. And so I think the list of characteristics is pretty exhaustive. So I'm gonna highlight just a few that come top of mind. Um, I think it starts with accountability. Um, I'll do this. Pastor A.R. Bernard, back home in New York, CCC, he did a whole thing on manhood, and he had said that there are four things that God wants from a man. There are four things that a woman wants from a man, and there are four things that men struggle with. And this is maturity, decisiveness, consistency, and strength.
Mm,
Um, so I'll piggyback on that. I do believe a man needs to be mature, decisive, consistent, and strong. I think some of the characteristics that undergird that are accountability and humility. I think you can go a long, long way in leading your family, your community, because I mean that is our position. It is to lead. Um, I think you can go a long way with accountability and humility. Um, I'm going to throw another word out there, which is, I think, for both men and women, but it displays differently, and that's submission. I think men need to know and learn how to submit to a higher power, and women need to learn and know how to submit to their man who is submitting to said higher power.
so Steve, Russ just gave his example of where he came up of what a good man should be. Like, what is the basis for you defining like what a good man is?
So even when I heard Russ talk, I heard a lot of balance in the
Mm,
adjectives that he gave. He said strength and he said submission.
mm,
He said, being able to be decisive, but also being humble. And that's what I mean by finding balance in your life. And everybody's going to have their own definition of what a good man should be. But like I said, like we talked about earlier, you have to be able to look in the mirror and see that man in the mirror. And you're the only one that can see through your own eyes. So you have to show up the best way you know how, and recognize that you're going to make mistakes along the way, but also learn from those mistakes.
mm. See, when I think about this question, I sometimes struggle, right? Like my struggle is understanding, am I good enough? Am I being am I being honest with myself and how I treat people, right? I found myself more in servicing of others rather than servicing of self a lot of times. And sometimes it can seem fake or orchestrated, but I've always wanted to make sure that people around me are always good. Checking in on people, making sure they're good, following up on if you said if I told you I would do something, and this is kind of alluding to all the things that you guys have already said, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
standing on your word, like, Nick, I have a performance somewhere and I told him I'm to be there. Look, I'm gonna move mountains to make sure I hold up to my promises. But sometimes when and we are flawed as humans, right? And so sometimes when we don't hold up to all of our promises, that thing that you've been trying to do to be good or do good for others sometimes comes against you, right? And so for me, this has been a tough one because it's like, what is good, what is bad? And I appreciated the conversation we had earlier. Is like, you know, you can't continue. You got to give yourself and the people around you some grace to understand that, like, what you're doing to be a good person isn't necessarily on the same level of criteria that everyone else is receiving it. So I definitely appreciate that. And for me, being a good person, where do I get some of that? Like, honestly, these are things that I would want people to do for me if without having to tell them to do it for me, right? Like, Russ came on the first iteration of the show, and he was willing to be open and honest about what it meant to be a Black man and where we are mentally. And it was, fractured, broken, right? That's how oddly enough, that's how I felt a lot. And sometimes when you're in, like, I was telling somebody else the other day, like, being a servant is sometimes a thankless job, right? And sometimes you can't tell when you can't tell when the work you're doing is effective, is received the way you intend to put it out. So there is a sense of validation that I'm gonna say myself as a good man tend to not receive, that makes me feel like, well, maybe I'm not doing good because I'm probably getting more negative feedback than I am positive feedback. You know what I mean?
I do. I do, and I feel you. At the same time, when you're doing these things, even though technically you're doing them for somebody else, they're coming from a space in you that is pure, and you have to be okay with giving that up without expecting any kind of like cheers or applause or thanks, because it's you feeling convicted to do so. So that's
right.
you essentially operating from your heart space. You know what I'm saying? Doing exactly what you feel as though is right. And
Right.
if somebody, if people are going to take that or they're going to leave it, but like we talked about earlier, there's something about alignment that will show you who tried this, and it'll show you how close essentially somebody should be to you. So the people that are able to recognize the gestures that you're putting forth and give you the reassurance that you're doing it and the way that you're seeking, you might want to bring that person a little closer. That might be somebody that's in your tribe, as opposed to people that don't pay attention to things like that. But it all starts with that sense of self and operating as yourself uninhibitedly, like without any.
We're human, right? Like, and
Absolutely.
I know Russ wanted to chime in real quick. It's like, sometimes I just want to freaking like, yo, thank you. Basic, like, yo, I see you, I hear you, like, yo, I appreciate it. And it's not like I don't like, for as much as I do to hear it all the time, I feel like sometimes it's gonna probably not be genuine, right? But like, bruh, from time to time, just give me a like, yo, I appreciate it. You know what I mean? Russ, you had something to say?
Oh yeah. It's funny. I've had this conversation pretty consistently over the last maybe 2-3 weeks. Just on Founders Day, some of the bros, we were chatting it up, having a drink, eating some wings and rapping. And some bros that we came up with, now married with children. And the sentiment was, yo, being a husband and father is hands down the most thankless job in America. And I think that that ties into just being a man, right? Being a man that has a a mindset of service, right? When service is your watchword and you operate in that space, there's not a lot of appreciation that's going to come back your way, right? At least not expressed.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it may materialize in what you intended to take place, the result of that service. It may materialize in the people around you growing and getting better, and you yourself getting better. But the actual expression, Purge, to your point of, yo, you know what? Thank you. That's those you appreciate when those come, because they don't come nearly as often as you would like.
So I have a question for both of you. As selfless Black men, do you feel as though you let it be known that gratitude is important to you in these places where you're offering so much and you're giving so much? Because we are creators of our own world, and you got to teach people how to treat you. So are we less likely to ask for this gratitude for Black men?
Yeah,
Goes a little bit further in showing vulnerability.
100%.
I think in different spaces, different arenas, that displays differently. So when having a discussion with my manager and us having friction over communication, and me expressing, hey, I do this, and this, and all I hear back from you is this. There's a better way for us to operate as a team that everyone feels seen, heard, appreciated, and maybe there's some things on my end that I need to communicate better. Maybe there's ways on your end you need to respond better, right? So I think, yeah, I totally agree with you. You do have to teach people how to treat you. When you're at home with your family, you also have to have those difficult conversations with your spouse. You have to have those difficult conversations with your parents. Depending on the relationship with your siblings, you may have to have those difficult conversations with your siblings. So overall, yes, I do agree. But when you have that thing, that like-minded thing where service kicks in, where I'm better because you're better, or it brings me joy to have just had a fraction of a piece to do with where you're going, what you're doing, you don't think of asking for that. You don't think of framing how to respond to my giving. You don't think of that. What happens is, I think, Purge, to your point, over time, and when you keep pouring and keep pouring, that cup gets low. And when it's shallow in there and it gets to that empty, that's when you're like, yo, you know what? I'd appreciate if somebody did a little something right here.
Right. And so, it's funny because I just had this conversation with my therapist this week, and she was like, are you asking for what you want? And, as I told you, Steve, earlier, it's like, I don't even know what to ask for. Right. Like, I'm doing all of these good gestures, or what I perceive to be good gestures. Right. I'm doing these things. And to Russ's point, it's kind of like you don't ask for it until you're depleted. You don't expect it until you're depleted, because you're doing this for everybody. And sometimes it's like, how do you ask? Right. We're not taught to like to your point earlier, like as kids, as a child, you're expected to ask for what you need. As a man, you're expected to just suck it up and continue to do. You know what I mean? Go ahead, Russ.
So one of the qualities that I think is very necessary and really needs to be grasped and held onto as a man is, when you ask for what you want, you ask for what you need, you don't get it, and you still do what you're supposed to do anyway. That's when you've leveled up a bit. right? Because we're, as human beings, cause and effect is a thing, right? I'm gonna give you what I get, right? But when you're really operating in the right spirit and you understand that there's something probably bigger going on here than whatever it is you think, you want, you feel, etc. When you don't get it and you still do your thing anyway, I think that's when you entered a different space of manhood.
But right, I feel like to be able to do what you just said, you have to have spent a good amount of time with yourself to know what your standards are for yourself. Like, and I think not enough of us have gotten to that point yet. We
And
look for so much outside of ourselves. We look to do so much outside of ourselves that we haven't really established what we want, who we are, like internally. Like, I'm gonna do this regardless of what happens because
The
that's just how
internally
I
is
do
it,
it.
dog. You're right, because your happiness is dependent upon you, dog. It's not from that affirmation. It's not from that validation.
Yeah,
It's not from that response. It's actually on you. So great point. You got to do that work inside to get there.
and one of the
absolutely.
things that we talked about earlier was the Thanos blip, right? Steve shared that during the pandemic, it was one of those things where, being able to connect with other people was through playing Call of Duty or games where, brothers can chat. Like I said, I wish I played video games, but, my attention span don't let me stay there. Right. But, with that being said, I think, we were forced into having to be introspective during the pandemic. And for those that didn't want to, they distracted themselves otherwise. Right. Now, I want to kind of like follow up with that was like, what were some examples in your life that you felt like were must-haves or were examples that you felt like you needed to emulate as a black man, as a good black man, or what you perceived yourself to be a good black man as? Did you guys have examples? And I'll kind of start off like, as a kid, I didn't know the vices of which the person I had emulated, right? Like, my dad's a dope dude. He would like, if for those of you that don't know, once again, just reiterating, this show is about are there any good black men out there? And one of the best guys I know is my dad, right? Perfect example of him doing for his community, immigrant that brought in other immigrants to make sure that they had better experiences, and always thought about others before he thought about himself. Now, once again, as a child, you don't see your parents' dark side or bad side. Because we're sheltered from a lot of the things that we're not supposed to see because we are children, right? And so a lot of what I emulated was the things he did well and the things that I didn't like in the people around me. So for me, it was I'm not gonna talk to somebody a particular way because I don't believe that's how I want to be talked about, right? I learned how to treat people honestly the way I didn't like people being treated by the people around me. And so I mean, I guess I'm a natural contrarian in that sense of, I know how I don't want people to feel because I know how they made people feel. So like for y'all, like what was that model or example that made you guys, because like, we talked a little bit, Steve, right? Like having a duality of lives, right? I'm West Indian, born here, but both of my parents are Haitian, right? You're Nigerian and American. So dealing with the two different ways of seeing multiple perspective. And then Russ grew up in probably the most melting pot in the world. So, he's seen things that, probably from similar to my perspective is like, all right, that's not what I want to do. So what were some of you guys' examples that made you guys the people that you are today?
I guess I'll go. So like you said, my father was paramount with me growing up, and just growing up and watching him move in a culture that wasn't his. The fact that he was able to come over here to the States by himself with no one, and before he left, he had 14 grandchildren. Just the way our family is growing, all because of the seed that he planted, in his mind at a younger age of, I want a better life, so I'm going to America, and the steps that he did to get here. And this is all after him fighting in a civil war over there and being wounded, and and bringing out all that experience over here to the States by himself. So just knowing that he had fought for something that he believed in physically, and then made a huge jump. I can't fathom trying to move to another country right now, and building a life over there with no one, absolutely no one. So that manhood has always stuck out to me, and that's actually what attracted me to the Bros first and foremost. Just that first cardinal principle, and how it was instilled in me just from the example of my father. But also, growing up and walking my own journey, I've also learned a lot of what not to do, like you said, from my father, and I didn't realize that until later in life, when I was able to look at him like a person and not like my father, when I could see him as the man that he was and not just my hero. So that was a very eye-opening moment for me. And for me, it's I think that's when things started to click for me in my head, and kind of led me to where I'm at now. So I'm definitely grateful for him and everything that he was and everything he wasn't.
Okay.
I think one of my manhood traits is compassion. Right? I think I'm a pretty compassionate dude, and it's because I've grown up experiencing, from a very early age, experiencing the good and bad of people. I've had a lot of really good people do a lot of really bad things to me, around me, in front of me. I thought it was great how you framed that, Purge, how you said, growing up, we don't know the vices of the people that we emulate. I didn't know all of them, but I definitely was exposed to some of them, a lot of them. But I always had a sense that that wasn't that person in totality, right? Which I think enables me moving forward to have grace, which I think is a good thing. The most consistent example that I've had, and probably the only consistent example that I've had, was my Uncle Kevin. My Uncle Kevin, I was a firefighter for 5 years. I wanted to be a firefighter because my Uncle Kevin was a firefighter. He was a DC firefighter, lieutenant on the rescue team. And he had been, it was amazing how he took care of his family. He took care of extended family, myself, used to come down here all the time to see them. They took me on vacation with them and their kids. He still had time for people, He took care of his family, he paid the bills, but he still had the time and the mannerism to love on you, He's not really very emotional, he's not super expressive or anything like that, but that Uncle Kevin loves you. And that was probably my best and most consistent example of manhood growing up.
Now, we're talking about manhood. We're talking about our definition of what a good man is, but we're driven by social norms, unfortunately, right? Now how we internalize that is different. But who sets the standard of what a good man is? And do you guys agree with some of those standards? And, for us, we fall under 3 different categories, right? We fall under men. Well, we fall under 4 categories, right? We fall under men, right? We fall under black men. We fall under men with cultural backgrounds, and we fall under men that just are doing something with themselves, right? And it's not that people that aren't doing something with themselves aren't good black men, but like being college educated is somewhat in some circles a criteria. Being handsome is a thing in some circles. Making money, there's some of these what was not stereotypical, but there's some of these flashy criteria that's been designed to be what identifies it as a black man. But like, I know you guys have heard it all. Good black men are hard to find, but we got 3 on here, 4 whenever he jumps on, that are easily here. Well, Russ is growing in his black manness, so we're gonna let him live on that one, right? but we got 3 on here to start, and yes, we're not perfect. And I think when you started stating the fact that we are humans first, I think there's this concerted ideology that we're not expected to be flawed. So like, 1, who sets these standards, and 2, do we agree with all of these ideologies? Go ahead.
So remember, Purge, the title of the podcast is SOS, super or sub.
Right.
And we're expected to be superhuman. And if we're not superhuman, then we're relegated to being treated as subhuman. And I think that is a very much so a social, that's a social norm. That's a practice, whether it's intentional or not. That's sort of the position that many black men feel that we're in. Yeah, I'll give it to you, Steve.
I think the criteria has evolved as our connectivity has evolved. So a lot of this is social media driven, and a lot of this is what people are viewing. And we all know the internet's not real. It's real, but it's not real for everyone. And I think a lot of these constructs that are being put on us are outlandish. And I'll say outlandish in a state of us not being given the grace to fall down and have to get back up, or to make a mistake. And it seems like a lot of people have this picture of what they view a black man should be. And if he doesn't fit in that picture, then he's not a good black man. And I think that's bogus. Like, I think every black man has good in them. I think every black man has amazing qualities. And like I spoke on earlier, it's about alignment. It might not align to specific people, and that's fine. But knowing when to, kind of put your hands up and move on is important. And knowing when to cuff someone and bring them along is important. Inherently, as a people, we want to bring everybody along because it's just how we are.
Right.
And that's very rarely the case. Never the case, actually. There's never going to be a time where everybody can go. And so just having the wherewithal to knowing, like, this is my kind of person, this isn't my kind of person, and being okay with that, and not allowing somebody else's expectations to make you feel less than because you don't fit their picture is important. It's important to us because, we always want to rise to the occasion as a black man. We always want to kind of be that the superhuman, like you spoke of, because that's in us as well. And I think just that definition of it, like, there's superhuman qualities that every black man has, but it's just about knowing what that looks like for you and you alone. Because I might think it's one thing, Cox might think it's another thing, you might think it's another thing, but I can't live up to you and Cox's expectations. I got to live up to my own first. So that's what I'll say.
So let's tap into our community, right? Like I know in the grand scheme of in the macro scheme of things, we know society, like the society as a norm, wasn't really designed for us. It was designed for this white man who has some level of privilege and has some level of understanding of where they fit in the world, right? As black men that um as so as I stated earlier, I had a conversation with some recent college grads, and going into a PWI for them, they felt like there was a series of imposter syndrome that life doesn't really prepare you for, right? So as black men going into the world, there's a different set of rules, or there's a different set of measuring stick for what makes us a good man. Like, who and how has that evolved into what it's become today? Because I mean, all we've done is try to be the best people that we can be, but yet as black men, there's another layer of expectations on us to be what's considered quote unquote good.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that additional expectation has always been there. Um, I will give our planet credit. I think it has done better at accepting the small nonsensical things a bit more. Um, Hairstyles, right? Even there's a push to embrace diversity, right? The idea that I come from a different place, I may speak a bit different, I may come from another country and have an accent. I have different perspective and things to add to the workplace. So I think that is being on a macro level. I think that's being embraced a bit more. So I'll give Earth credit for that. Um, but as far as the scrutiny for black men or for people of color, because I don't necessarily think it's just black men. I think it's a people of color thing. Um, I think it's a a dark brown thing.
Mm.
Um, that there are these preconceived notions and expectations, and if you don't fit into even the extended box, there's some reticence, there's some trepidation to embrace the whole you, right? I think the workplace is embracing more of us, but still far and away not ready for the whole us.
So I'm gonna add a little color to this conversation, and pun intended, right? I'm gonna add this next guest on. Good fella, just all around. He's the person everybody kind of trusts you to go out with. I know that's been me when I was in Pittsburgh. Just say my name, and you're good to go out. So we're gonna bring this good brother on, and the reason I'm gonna add a little color to this is the fact that Dominican born, lives in the United States, identifies as black. And being from the Dominican Republic, we know that is not a popular opinion, right?
No, sir.
So we're gonna kind of make sure everybody knows where we are with this initial question is, what does being a good man mean to you? So Nelson, if you want to tap on that, and we can go double back on what Russ was talking about.
I think that how we define that is hard because there's no blanket way to define that. Like, we all have different views, so everybody's gonna have a different point of view in terms of what that means. I think we can all agree being a good man and being a good black man become two separate things at the same time. Like, there's a duality there, and I think being a good man is in the most basic form. I think is just being a man of your word. I think a lot of times, if people can't take your word for what it is, it discredits you in so many ways. Like, if I tell you I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it, and if you don't, you're already discredited. Like, you're not held to a specific standard. And as a black man, you're already held to a particular standard, and you want to make sure you stick to that. So, for example, I told you I'd be here for this episode. I literally just got back from the desert, threw a shirt on, and jumped on. And I was like, I wasn't trying to be mean to the driver, but he literally drove past my hotel to drop everybody else off and then get me here. So, like, when I told you I would be on at around 9, it was my assumption I would. And then I watched the hotel go by, and I was like, yeah, this is bad.
So I want to continue with the conversation, right? And I appreciate you. So Russ was talking about, the expectations of being a black man and being a good black man, and who sets those. Steve, you look like you wanted to tap in on that as well.
I did, because I think society. I was thinking about what Russ said. Like, he gives credit to the planet for getting a little bit better, for with their acceptance. But I don't know, man. These days, I'm so radically myself. I don't care who accepts me. I don't care how I'm viewed by people that don't necessarily matter. Because again, I'm gonna show up how I'm gonna show up because of my own standards for myself. And that's just gonna be what it is. Like, I'm gonna put my best foot forward in everything that I do, and the outcome's gonna be the outcome, whether that leads to A or B. And I'm going to be okay with that outcome because I know I've exhausted everything I have to get there.
Go ahead,
so that's why I feel like this kind of radical notion. So it's like being accepted in these societal constructs.
You do realize what you're saying is indeed radical, and by definition, it's out of the norm. It is people that look like you and me. The vast majority of us we couldn't sustain life operating that way.
Absolutely.
So the fact that, I think we do need to give credit to the planet, because the fact that we can sit here, and probably all of us could say that at this point, and still be gainfully employed, and still have food and shelter, and still carry on in social spaces and professional spaces, just being self. And whether you accept it or not, I can do that and still be okay, is progress. Because it was not long ago that you couldn't do that. And it was your livelihood, both personal and professional, was absolutely in jeopardy if you operated that way.
Now,
I agree.
Steve's point, hold on real quick. To Steve's point, right? I think there's, as black men, there's a level of growth we need to acknowledge within ourselves, right? Like, I've expressed that I'm still growing. I think Steve's background, there's a level of pride of coming from where his dad's come from. And I think he's mentioned earlier, he's fortunate to have that sense of self early on. And or has worked on himself to the point where you got to get there, right? Like, you got that is growth to get to a place where external entities can't influence how I see myself as a good person, how I believe in myself to be good person, and how I can present myself to others without worrying whether or not they believe that what I'm saying and doing for them is genuine. That's growth.
Yeah, and I think it boils down to not caring about outside opinions. Like, it's liberating to not care about other people's opinions, because you present yourself in a way that you are proud of, that you can stand by. So it's like, it's a movie quote. It's one of the Ocean's movies, but at the end of the movie, the dude says, "The minute you become embarrassed of who you are, you forget yourself."
And to piggyback off that, I didn't just wake up one day and say, I don't care what everybody, I didn't just wake up and just be like this, like coming out, there was a lot of work that I had to do. But to piggyback off what you just said, the act of gaining self-knowledge is always going to be the most important journey we ever go on. And when our knowledge of self starts with segregation and slavery, that's a disservice to every Black man, because before that, we were so much more, and our ancestors were so much more, and they and I think to not be able to connect to that and only connect to that period of time where there was so much trauma and so much against us as a people, when you think of that, you think that you're starting from behind the line, when in all actuality, if you're able to connect to to further times before that, further periods of the Black and African Pan American people, we're so much more and so much greater. And I think if we had a system that would teach that, instead of Christopher Columbus and and like the curriculum that's brought about today, I think we as a people will be much different. And that's the issue with it all boils down to these systems again. You got this, people are forced to have two parents working. So you're leaving this system to 85-90% of the education that your kids are given. And that's completely incorrect, because there's so much missing from that.
And that ties into the conversation we were having prior to the show, Steve, is like, this is a much larger conversation, right? So, your family, my family, Nelson's family, and Russ's family are rooted outside of the American diaspora, right? So there is a perspective that we clearly see. Like, other part of that conversation, if we wanted to all up and go, everyone on this screen can go somewhere. We have a place to call home. Everybody doesn't have that. So the conversation of those Black Americans or those in the Black community that they only can go back to slavery as their heritage and as their heritage history, we can't fault them for that, right? But I think what you're saying is we do need to add a level to our education in which we go beyond that, right? But even then, this is all some people know. And to go elsewhere is to further displace them in a location in which they have no ties, no families. And once again, this is not a matter of like defending or supporting, but this is just kind of the reality of where we are. And I'd love to extend this conversation into another discussion, but I know Russ, you wanted to say something, and we're gonna move on.
Yeah, I don't think there's any defense or support. I mean, any defense needed. I think we're all in support of the same idea. The why I highlighted that with what Steve said and how he expressed is because when here in America, it didn't matter whether or not you came from Nigeria, or if you came from Haiti, or if you came from Grenada or from DR. That slave foundational springboard was the base for everyone. So as a Black man, don't care where you come from, you're a Black man, and I'm not interested in who you think you are. I'm not interested in how you think you are or how you think you should be treated or any of that. So the fact that we're here now and this brother can express that and the four brothers on here can live that way is
amazing.
Is amazing.
Yeah.
But it should be commonplace, and the fact that it's not is probably the most disheartening part.
But that's why we have these conversations, because while it wasn't, and at some point, I'm saying, hopefully the goal is for these conversations to keep happening, and for us to instill the youth coming in after us to look that far and see that far. I know me personally, I only speak from my own seat, and I only speak from my own experience. But I know me being able to stand on my father's shoulders, I know my dad was a giant. Me being able to stand on his shoulders, I can now see further than he could. When he planted that little mustard seed, way back when, to get him to the States. So it's my job to take that baton and run my leg at a race and then hand it off.
So with all of these standards put up against us, right? Like, there's a lot to fight through and a lot to there's a lot that can create a very dark tunnel for us, right? As Black men. Like, what makes you continue to want to be a good man, a good person? Because it can easily, like, that light at the end of the tunnel can seem so far that we can just be like, yo, I'm just gonna be a slime ball. I'm just
And I
gonna
mean,
be running these streets.
it's
And Russ is
it's
trying to properly orchestrate
right.
his words
His response, right?
because
But I
there's
mean,
only the audio on it. So just so y'all know, the audio on his side is one way, and whatever
yeah,
he says is what the other person on the other side of the table can hear. So with
right.
that being said, I
He has
appreciate
to,
you.
right. He has an audience that we can't see.
Right.
So he has to tailor his responses accordingly. But it's tough, right? Because it's like you said, like the light at the end of the tunnel, and people always make reference to it. And one day somebody was like, "Yeah, you got to have faith in where you're going, because the reality of it is that the light at the end of the tunnel could be a train. It's not the end of the tunnel. So it's like you have to push forward. You can't let life or the things that you go through set you back or dictate how you change your approach to life. You have to, being a good man, being a good person in general, is a conscious thing that you decide every morning when you get up. And it's a part of who you are. It's a part of who Steve is. It's a part of who Russ is. It's a part of who you are, who I am. Like, when we get up, none of us are thinking, all right, I'm gonna start some shit today. It's like, no, like, I'm gonna get up, I'm gonna do what I do, but I'm gonna do it to the best of my ability, because that's who I am. And I think that, like, to piggyback off of what Steve said, like, you know, like, we're standing on the shoulders of giants, like, whether we acknowledge it or not. Like, my father's a physician back home, but when he came to the United States, they told him he had to take all his tests over. Like, same thing with my mom. My mom was doing open heart surgery back in Dominican Republic, but when she came to the United States, they told her she had to take all the tests over to do something she had already been doing. So it's like, I come from a house of learned doctors, and I'll be the first to tell you, I hate going to school. I hate school. And I say this as I'm going through a certification process, but I need to do these things to be able to reach the levels I want to reach. So I owe it to them. You know, they sacrificed a lot. They brought me here so that I could get a better education, so I could create a better standard of living. Why would I then turn around and drop the ball and, like, you know, drop that baton? Like, no, I gotta keep going.
I'm gonna say this is better than that. That's why we make the decisions to.
Yep.
There you go.
We lost him.
It was a matter of time. But
Thank you.
but he'll be right back.
Yeah.
Steve.
I'll say I recognize this journey that I'm on, and I know where I'm at right now on this journey is not where I was yesterday, a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. And I know that I'll be learning for the rest of my life, through experience, through formal education, through, you know, just getting out of the bed and walking down the street, and understanding that I know I can only show up the way that I am. You know, I can only do what I can do. There's no blueprint to this thing we call life. Everybody's trying to figure it out
at all. Right.
The more that we I'm sorry, give me 1 second. The more that we try to emulate, you know, this person's life or that person's life or that person's life, it takes the focus off self. And I'm really grateful for my sense of self these days, because it wasn't always like that. I spent so much time seeing and worrying about how I'd be perceived by this group of people or that group of people or this person in particular, that I wasn't able to know me and know what I bring to the table, and know how I want to show up, or know why I show up the way that I do. And now that I have that knowledge and knowing, you know, why I am the way that I am, now it's so much easier for me to just be. It's so much easier for me to just show up and do what I do and bounce. And, you know, whatever I get from it, I get. Whatever I don't get from it, I don't get. But at the end of the day, there's nothing that takes away from this. There's nothing that takes away from this sense of who I am and how I show up. And it's an amazing space to be in. It really is. And so looking forward, I'm not worried about the challenges that'll come and happen tomorrow. I'm not worried about, you know, whether or not I get, you know, what this aspect of something material today, because I know I'm blessed and highly favored. You know what I'm saying? I'm creating the life that I want to create daily. I'm not just allowing life to happen to me anymore. So this space that I'm in right now is such a powerful space that I'm just sitting back and letting it happen, and recognizing when things do happen. Like, oh, I made this decision. Oh shit, I got rewarded today from this coming in. Like, it's just the seeds that I've planted years ago are finally coming to fruition today. You know, and like just through that notion allows me to keep operating how I'm operating. So to answer your question, Purge, just that sense of self and sense of knowing who I am allows me to show up daily as a good man.
So and you have to be unapologetically you. Like, to piggyback off of what Steve is saying, like you can't worry about how people are going to receive it, because you're never going to be able to please everybody. No matter how genuine and how much of a good man you are, somebody is going to see you and be like, I don't like him, for a reason that you can't quantify. And the reality of it is, it's not your job to, because it's not your job to please that person. It's your job to be you and just show up and be the good person you know you are.
So that's perfect, because it ties. So what you guys are talking about right now, and I want us to continue it, right? This is the next question that I have for you guys, right? Like, have you been made to feel like you weren't a good man, let alone a good person, and why? Right. And I think to what you guys are both talking about is like, people tend to project things on us that, I mean, they having a bad day, you might have said something wrong. And if you're not the strong person that you guys have built yourselves to be, like, it makes it difficult to be like, all right, well, that could have been me. That could have been on me. But I'll let you finish, Steve, and then we're going to go to this question and touch on it a little bit more.
Yeah. Actually, what I have to say kind of ties in with this question. In every conflict, everybody believes they're the good guy. Like, in every conflict, everybody has their own perspective, and they believe that to be true, or they have their own feelings, which are valid. But a lot of times people are quick to talk and not quick to listen. And I think a lot of things, there's a communication gap in a sense of vulnerability. Like, how vulnerable can I actually be in this conversation to explain exactly what I mean or how I feel, and is it worth it? Because vulnerability to us is like a currency. It only goes out to specific people.
Yep.
So
especially as a black man.
So it's like, am I safe enough to have this conversation candidly with this person, and is it worth it? So with that being said, I've absolutely been made out to people have felt like I'm not a good man, or I'm not a good person. And I recognize I can be the villain in someone's story and the hero in another person's story. It's all about their perspective. But regardless of how they feel towards me, I know I showed up the best way I knew how in every situation. So I can sleep soundly. I can have regrets, but again, if I have a regret, is it worth me going back to this person and apologizing, you know, for this regret that I have, and how will it not how will it be received, but do I have that currency to give out?
Right.
You know, and sometimes I do, and sometimes I don't. And when I don't, I just kind of have to forgive myself in those moments and keep it pushing.
Yep. And to piggyback off of what Steve was saying, you said a lot. Damn, you said a lot of good shit. But you know, like, everybody's a villain, and you're a villain in somebody's story, and you're never going to be able to change that narrative, because there are a lot of people who see.
Oh, not another one. Another one bites the dust. Tell you, the internet is vicious today. We're speaking too much truth into the world. And he's going, and he's like,
He's
All
back.
right,
He's
there you
back.
go. Go ahead.
You cut out, bro. Take your time.
Yep.
Oh,
Nope.
okay.
Nope. Yeah.
It's all right.
So,
It's all right.
you
You're gonna
know,
come back.
and to this question, I think my perspective is I don't know, right? So like I've, you know, I've always felt like to your point, right? Like in your attempt to always trying to do good, somebody's always going to see something bad in what you're doing. You know what I'm
Sorry
saying?
about that.
No
No, it's
problem.
good,
So
bro.
go ahead, continue. I'll continue after that.
Yeah, I was saying you know, like there are people who look at you as a villain because they've only ever heard the other person's side of the story. And I think the most freeing thing you can do for yourself is give up wanting to tell your side of the story. Let go of that need to tell your side of the story, because the reality of it is the people who know you for who you are, they don't even need to hear the story.
It's your tribe.
They know who you are. They right. Your tribe is going to support you, and I pride myself on surrounding myself with people who are going to call me on my bullshit and tell me when I'm wrong, but they're also never going to question my decisions. They'll support my decisions.
Gotta love the internet.
It's cool. He's gonna come back.
Yeah, he's definitely
I
gonna
got
come
faith.
back.
I got faith.
Um, um, just to kind of continue this just while he comes back, like, do you feel that there were times in which you've detached yourself from certain situations that led people to feeling like you weren't that good guy or you weren't a good person? Because I know we all go through a lot, and sometimes, you know, even in grieving, like, here's the crazy thing about grieving, right? Even in grieving, people don't realize like we all grieve differently, right?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes people don't understand the fact that like when you're dealing with something tough, your detachment that leads you to like not listening, pay attention, or giving them what they want is kind of your way of kind of like giving yourself what you need, right? That solace,
Mhm.
that solitude, that time to yourself, to your thoughts, to be able to kind of like be able to do that. But like some of us, like I'll say for myself, you know, I think in my early years, I was seen as a bad guy because I was pretty absent-minded towards other people's needs, right?
Mhm.
I know many a times, you know, I was at fault, right? I was at fault because I was so disconnected with being empathetic. I was disconnected with being considerate of people's times. Like all of the things we talked about being a good guy, I know as a flawed human that I contributed to sometimes being perceived as not a bad guy, but it wasn't in a malicious
Malicious.
way, right?
Mhm.
Because I think
Right.
sometimes as we go through life, like Nelson says, shit just happens, and you're probably not the first person on my mind when I'm thinking of a particular thing, and I'm just
Right.
trying to go through my day. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But you got to surround yourself with people who understand that. Like if it does me no good to get mad at you because you didn't hit me up about something we were talking about, because I don't know what you have going on. Like, and
Mm.
that's like one of my biggest pet peeves is people who hit you up and be like, damn, you ain't hit me up, or I haven't heard from you. Like, you don't know what I've been dealing with. You don't know what I've had going on. Like, it takes nothing for you to say, hey, what's up? And then bring up the fact that you haven't heard from me.
But
And
how vulnerable would it be for somebody to say, "Yo, I miss you"?
Listen, so I'm gonna just be I'm gonna be a buck with y'all, right? I'm gonna be a buck with y'all, right? I deal with this on every time I call home, right? My mom has this thing is I don't call home enough, so that makes me a bad guy. I listen, it is what it is, right? I
bro,
call home. My mom is like, by the graces of God, I'm good. But if it were up to you, I'd be dead and you wouldn't know. Now, that's her way of saying I miss you and you need to call more, right?
I'm laughing because I I literally deal with this. Well, I mean, we're from the same place. I deal with
Mhm.
the same thing. Like, I legit just got a text message from my mother earlier that said, "I didn't hear from you the rest of the day yesterday."
Mhm.
Like, if you don't check in, it
It's cultural.
You know,
yeah,
and
like
and to Steve's point, it's like, you know, and well, not Steve's point, but to Nelson's point, we are going through life, and sometimes, you know, I know I mean a lot to you, but like in the midst of my day, I'm trying to put this fire out. I'm trying to find my peace. I'm trying to do these things. And I think what is perceived to be as a detachment isn't necessarily a detachment. It's us trying to find our peace in those moments.
It's a simple miscommunication, because
Yeah.
I'm sure if you guys were able to have a candid conversation, leading with vulnerability,
right.
You've talked to an aunt that's from Nigeria yet? You've had these conversations with an aunt from Nigeria yet?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, no.
Okay.
I get what
See,
this is a perfect world. I'm saying in a perfect world.
I got you.
You know, because in a perfect world, everybody does the work, right?
Right.
And everybody understands the work that needs done. But you only understand from your own perspective. So with that being said, a conversation, you know, most times when there's a grievance or a difference of opinion, it's a breakdown in conversation,
right?
And a breakdown in understanding, because it's so much easier to say I understand where you're coming from when I understand where you're coming from. If I don't understand where you're coming from, then I'm feeling slighted. I'm feeling like you're doing this to me and not doing something for yourself.
Right.
That's easier for me to understand, because I've been in situations where I can do something for myself and I might be perceived like I'm doing something to someone else.
Right.
But there has to be that conversation to kind of bridge that communication in order for it to be understood.
You literally took the words right out of my mouth, because I was going to say, I think a lot of times when we go through misunderstandings or situations where we're looked at as not being a good person, like how many of those situations could have been fixed with a conversation? Like how many times were you looked at as a bad person or as not a good man because of lack of communication and not lack of any specific action you took?
I mean, even
now, I will say,
go ahead.
I will say real quick, I didn't always have this level of communication skills.
Oh yeah, no.
So
for sure.
Again, recognizing the journey that I'm on, I'm not where I am today. I wasn't there yesterday or a month ago or 2 years ago. So when I was in these situations, when I was in these situations a couple of years ago, I might not have had the communication skills to say my piece, to get you to understand where I'm coming from. But again, that has to do with me being able to forgive myself for not being there in that moment and show up differently, you know, as I am today.
And so with that being said, like, do you guys think your past selves should still be used to hold you accountable for who you are today?
No,
right?
Absolutely.
And I mean, it sounds like a stupid question to ask, but it's like, you know, I mean, I really wish Rush was on here, right? Like, you know, and when I say that, I wish he was on here, because like this question was really for him, all right, in the sense where, and you know, once again, it's nothing that he hasn't expressed on here. You know, his past self was a wild boy, and I think sometimes in certain circles and in certain situations, our past selves is still held against us in determining whether we are still good or if we've gotten to a place of being a good man. You know what I mean? 100%. So do you guys think that like our past like should negate who we are today as a man? Because I mean, I'll start the question by answering, like, I think my past should show you how I've grown and who I've become, right? In the sense of, I ain't gonna lie, I told my wife, like, listen, my past was my past. This is who I was. Right before you, this is who I was. And it was one of those situations where I had to put it all out there, so you understand like where I came from and who I am. And who I am today isn't the person I was in the past. And who I am today, I am better because I was working to find you, not like you in a figurative, like in the literal sense, but like I need to find the person that's going to accept my good, my bad, and my growth. right? Like, and the fact that I'm still growing, because that's the one thing I said. I'm like, I'm still working on myself, and
As you should.
the things that I struggled with in the past are things that I'm still working through, still trying to figure out. And then, like, you know, when we said earlier, communication, I was like, listen, I'm working on how to better communicate with you so that I can be the better man for you. Like, you don't just like being a good man is not a single point in time, it's a continuous effort. Like you guys mentioned earlier, it's the desire to keep going regardless of what's going on in our lives. So with that being said, you know, I mean, should your past negate your current and your future selves?
You want me?
No, I think. Yeah, go ahead, Steve. I think it's too often we forget that people lived a whole life before you met them. Like, even like you and I, for example, we've known each other going on almost 10 years. You lived an entire life before you knew me. You had experiences, and aside from the experiences we created together, the things we've been through, you had an entire life before I met you. So for me to find out something about your life before I existed in it and hold it against you doesn't make sense, because I don't know what you were going through at that time. I don't know what factors outside of who you are contributed to how you dealt with those situations in your life. And it's the same for Steve. Like, Steve could tell me about his life prior to this moment, and I can appreciate the fact that he's sharing it with me, but I cannot listen to one specific story and change how I view him as a man because of something he told me that happened before I was even in his life. And I don't think anybody should ever hold your past self against you. If anything, like you said, they should use it to understand how far you've come, how much you've grown, that you're no longer the person you were before. And I've dealt with people who have had grievances with me off of stuff they heard about my past life, about who I was 10, 15 years ago, that they never they never came to talk to me about, but they've been holding a grudge against me. And I'm like, so you spoke to everybody else about it except the one person who can give you the source of truth about that situation.
Without,
I don't think so at all. Go ahead.
What I'll say about my past and the past in general is that it shows me who's along for the journey with me. It shows me who my tribe is, because if I can sit in a chair and somebody say, you know what, I remember how you used to show up, and you show up so much differently today, and I appreciate how you show up today. There's that gratitude we were talking about, Purge, because I've had conversations like that, and I feel that warmness, I feel that gratitude, and I'm appreciative of it. But it also lets me know, like, oh, you see me. Not everybody sees you. Not everybody is privy to see you. They may have heard something about you. They may have a preconceived notion of you, like you were saying, but not everybody sees you. The people that are able to see me are my tribe. The people that are able to see me are the people that I can cuff and bring along. And those are the people I think about when I'm ready to pour out. Like, oh, bro, what are you doing? How you been? Like, oh, I need to pour into this person as much as they're pouring into me. And that reciprocity is what builds strong relationships, strong community. And like I said earlier, it's sad because we want to bring everybody along, but not everybody can come. Not everybody is on the same wavelength as you and I. And in knowing that, you're teaching yourself about life and death. You're teaching yourself about balance again, because sometimes there's life that arises. Like, you and I could establish a brand new friendship today just off this conversation. That's life. Somebody could be listening to this and say, you know what, I don't really mess with Steve no more because he said some things I don't really like. That's a death. And it's all teaching about balance in life. And I think balance, I know, at least for me, I can only speak from my own seat. Balance is something that is most important to me. It's something that I strive for. It's something that I want to live in, because there can be no light without darkness. Your greatest joys only have the potential of your deepest sorrows. So I want to experience both. I want to be able to show up both, but I want to show up as myself wholeheartedly, unapologetic.
Yep.
And that to me is being a good man.
Yes.
Regardless of what
bars, bro.
Yo,
He's
Steve stay with the bars, you know. I mean,
Yo.
I didn't know he's a rapper and stuff like that.
But
I'm a
but
speaker of words, bro. Speaker of birds.
To piggyback a little off of what he said, like, yeah, like your tribe are the people who can see you for you, like no armor, no guard up, like they can see you for who you are. And like it's like that meme or that quote is like the people who love you, who are your tribe, are the people who can hear when you're quiet.
Exactly. Yep.
Like those are the people who are like who reach out to you, and it's like, you good over there? Like, I haven't heard from you, just checking in. Like, but you have to appreciate those people and cultivate those relationships, because like Steve said, those are the people you're going to grow with. Those are the bonds that are going to help you in whatever your next stage in life is, because those are the people who are thinking of you when you think nobody's thinking about you.
Deep. So I want to touch on this, right? Like, how do we overcome these negative perceptions of ourselves, right? Like, how do we deal with the fact that someone doesn't think we're a good person, a good man? You know, and it sounds like based on this conversation, it doesn't matter, but it does, right? Like, how do we address this?
You have to determine how much it matters to you. I think at the end of it, right? Because it really depends on how much you care to fix that perception. Because at the end of it, it's not your job to correct anybody's point of view of you. Like, two different people could sit here and listen to this conversation, and like Steve said, one person could be like, you know what, I don't really fuck with Steve no more. And somebody else that didn't like him before could be like, you know what, I think I understand him better now, so I'm going to make sure I reach out to him more often. So I think a lot of it has to do with how much you think you need to correct that, and how much of it you feel like you're responsible for. Because you're not going to please everybody. There's no way, like, you can walk into a room with 100 people. There are going to be people that don't like you, and they might not even know why.
I think, like you said, the perception of me only holds weight to people I deem it holds weight with. So, you know, there's one way I want my lady to look at me, and there's the other way I want women to look at me. And they're vastly different. You know, I much rather my standing hold weight in Purge's eyes than someone else that I don't know. So, you know, I think it just goes in knowing who your tribe is, letting your tribe be revealed to you, and then recognizing it when they are. And those are the people that need to be able to see you. But at the same time, letting them see you on their own. Like, you can't, you know, stand up like a peacock with your feathers out and say, hey, look at me, I'm doing so good, and expect all the praises. If I can just be me and be viewed how I'm viewed, I'm okay with it, because I view myself as a good man. I view myself, you know, as you know, one of the best to do it.
So that's a great way for me to kind of go to where I want to go next. And we touched on this earlier. Like, it's one thing to have a perception of being a good man. How do you guys feel when people actually acknowledge it? Because, like I said earlier, being a good man is a thankless job, right? Being in service is a thankless job. But when it's actually given to you, like, for me, I still struggle with it, right? Because I know it's a thankless job and I'm just doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And so I've had sisters tell me, like, yo, bro, just accept it. Like, don't be like, nah, it's just what I do. It's not in, I don't mean to dismiss their acknowledgement. It's so unexpected and uncommon that when it's given, I almost feel like, why am I being praised for something I should be doing anyway?
Right. I think
It's almost like
you're speaking for
compliments
both of
as
us.
well. It's
Yeah,
almost
yeah.
like compliments as well. It's like, oh, you're so
Mhm.
handsome. Like, all right, like everybody says this. Like, what makes this any different from what everybody
Right.
else is saying? You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like, how do you guys receive giving these thanks, giving these flowers of doing the things you've just always been doing?
I think you're speaking for both of us, and you might be even be speaking for Steve, but I do a horrible job at it. I'm actively working on getting better at accepting praise when it's given.
I will say, as Black men growing up, it's not often that we're given affirmations. It's not often that we're taught to give ourselves affirmations.
Mm-hmm.
So in these instances, it's like we're embarrassed when we're getting them because we're not
Yep.
used to it. And
Mm-hmm.
that's an emotion that you have to understand and kind of dive into. Like, okay, why do I feel like I can't accept this? Well, shit, I feel like I
Mm-hmm.
can't accept it because I'm not used to it.
Right.
So again, everything, I hate to beat a dead horse, but everything starts with self. And if you can see yourself in this way, if you can hear yourself talk about yourself in a personal manner, and I'm talking about self-talk in your head, like
Mm-hmm.
you'll never spend as much time with anybody as you spend with
You
yourself.
do it yourself. Yep.
Like, and you have to change that conversation in your own head to where you expect good things. And then when good things happen, you're no longer surprised by them happening. You expect
Mm-hmm.
to hear the job that you're doing, and then when you do hear it, you're like, oh yeah, I know. And it's not in a cocky way. It's in a way of knowing. Like
Mm-hmm.
I will say with that on my journey, I'm getting better at receiving compliments. I'm getting
Mm,
better at hearing good things from other people. But it's also the things that I listen to. Like if I'm on Clubhouse, I'm listening to Secret Laws of Attraction, which is basically all affirmation based lectures, just kind of taking you through different things. And I've noticed how my craving for different content has changed. Like it's no
Mm-hmm.
longer as soon as the new album's out, I got to listen to that album. Like it took me a week to get to Nas's new album, but
mm,
I was
Mm.
so dialed in on what I had going on internally that it wasn't what I needed. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of times we digest things as background and there's no
mm.
Right.
intention behind it. But once you
Yep.
put an intention into yourself, the outside world will start to look like what you're taking in.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
Nice, nice. And just kind of, with all this being said, right? What would you tell your younger self about how your actions would either have a negative or positive impact among our community, right? Like the things we say and do will either forever live with how people perceive you, or it will for in a positive way or a negative way, because it's like our first impression sometimes can be the impression that lasts the longest.
Yep.
And um you know y'all know, as the bres, we go on campus, we become the bres. So like here's the thing, like, and with all Greek letter organizations or whatever organizations you tie yourself to, there is you prior to being Greek or
Mm-hmm.
whatever Greek letter organization you're in, and then there is now you, that Greek person, and it's almost as if the person that existed prior never happened, right?
Right. Never
This is
existed.
similar when we introduce ourselves into the real world. How we perceive, how we present ourselves ends up becoming how people perceives us. And if you're unable to, uphold that projection, right? People start to now see you as different, right? Because it's like, you know, um, I find it easier to just be honest, as painfully as that can be with people, and forward as possible, right? I do need to work on delivery. I do need to work on timing, but I will always give you the real, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm also always, very intentional to remain positive in how I do things. That wasn't always the case. But as we grow and as we figure out like how do we show up for people, like I'm not gonna lie to you, the Bruz really taught me how to show up.
Mm-hmm.
The Bruz embraced the Bruz, and this is not like a advertisement for the Bruz, but y'all already know what it is. But the
Trying to stay with
brotherhood
that,
was
baby.
different. And
Mm-hmm.
for some of you that's watching, for the longest, I didn't think the Brez knew what my name was because they just called me the Haitian, right? So from 2004 on, 2000, I'll say 2004, but 2003 on, like I know one person who only calls me the Haitian, but I'm learning that that's his sense of saying I love you. You know what I mean? And
Mm.
and when he hits me up, it's the Haitian, what's good with the Brez? I'm like, in my head, the Brez is plural, right? I'm like, bro, you only text me. But I say all that to say, to kind of like, I'll start like I'll tell my younger self, don't be so easily offended by how people perceive you, because at the end of the day, you're not everybody's flavor. You're not for everybody. I grew up timid. I grew up really kind of scared of rejection. I grew up concerned about, like, I grew up in Brooklyn in the 80s as a Haitian kid, right?
Ooh.
And so if anyone knows what that's like, it's like Haitian booty scratcher. And then Steve, if you were in New York, they called you an African booty scratcher, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was
Yeah.
like, what does that even mean? Right. But it's like they bundle so all in. And then I remember as a kid being beat up because I was Haitian, or being tormented and tortured. And so it's not till college that I was like, yo, like nobody really cares. Right? Like
Mm-hmm.
you go into this real world, nobody really cares where you come from. Everybody's coming in to a university and everybody has a sense of imposter syndrome. Some
Mm-hmm.
people have a great or better way of hiding it. So I would tell myself, like, don't consume all of that and make that who you are early on, right? Take
Mm-hmm.
take a little bit of what Steve said, take a little bit of what Nelson said, is, take those that have been giving you the proper praises and giving you the affirmation, and allow those people to define your identity.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
No, I agree with you 100%. I think I would echo the same sentiments. Like don't take yourself too seriously, but also don't get so caught up in how people perceive you, because it's not your job to maintain an image that people like. The image people create of you based off their perception in their head is not your responsibility to live up to. And you have to let go of that, because you end up forming this habit of constantly trying to please people and meet that version of yourself. And then it's like everybody has a different version of you that they think of in their head. You cannot compete with that or try to keep up with that, because then you're going to lose a sense of self. You're
Mm-hmm.
going to forget who you are trying to live up to everybody else's expectations, when the only person's expectations you need to live up to are your own. And then to your point about like your tribe, like you find your people, and it's important to communicate with your people. One of my pro fights, I love it, and he said it to me, and I say it to everybody whenever I'm having like Purge. I've said it to you, like when I'm having a conversation with my friends and they're dealing with something, tell me how you want to handle this situation so I know what kind of friend I need to be to you. Because my default version of supporting you isn't going to serve you in every aspect of what you're going through. So
Mm-hmm.
I know the same way I have to adjust. I have to make tweaks. I can't just be that same default person across the board, because you might be going through something that requires me to be a little more vulnerable or to be a little more empathetic. And again, it just all draws back to communication, how you tell your people how to show up, how you communicate with your tribe. And sometimes you don't have to say anything at all. Sometimes it's more so just show up and listen.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I long story short, I would just echo a lot of the sentiments you would say to your younger self. And I think the only thing differently that I would say to myself, and this is like a little outside of the question, is just to embrace my blackness. Like on my side of the island, we're not taught to embrace our blackness. There are people darker than me who who deny the fact that they're black. And it wasn't until college, and then take it a step further, becoming the bruz, that I was really able to come into my blackness and really embrace my blackness for what it is, to the point where I would get into arguments with people about whether or not I was black.
Mm.
Mm.
Word. I love this question, and my answer is always the same to it, because I wouldn't tell my younger self anything. All those lessons that I've learned have led me to be where I'm at now, and they were very necessary. And I'm a big proponent in not every lesson you learn is gonna be, roses and rainbows. Like some shit you got to get out of the mud. And I appreciate those moments of getting things out of the mud because it taught me how to do so. And as I said earlier, I'm seeking this balance in life. And now I'm at a point where I could recognize that those instances have led me to where I am now. And all those lessons I learned along the way were very paramount and important. So I wouldn't take back any prior relationship. I wouldn't take back any prior instance or situation, because everything that I went through taught me something. So really, I wouldn't tell my younger self any kind of, I wouldn't try to drop any gems on my younger self, because I don't even know if in that mind I would have been able to receive the information I was given.
Right, that's a fact.
It might like, because I feel like and throughout life I've had elders and mentors, tell me things that were gems that they were trying to drop on me, but I only was able to understand it once I was able to understand it.
Right.
And those lessons came right when they needed to come. And my future lessons are going to come as they need to, and I trust that.
Mm-hmm.
So I might bust it up and talk about basketball with my younger self.
Right.
And
Right.
like I might try to have that conversation and just kind of get a knowing of where my head was at when I was in that space. But I don't know that I would really sit there and try to drop life lessons on myself. I think I would just allow life to do that.
Awesome.
And I think
go ahead.
Questions like that one are important because they kind of let you know how to assess those situations. That's why I love your answer, Steve. Like I get a lot of times we think on our past, we think of lessons we learned, we think of things we would have done or we should have done differently. And you get so caught up on the, damn, I should have done this way because then X, Y, Z would have happened. But then it's like, you wouldn't be where you are today. And I used to beat myself up a lot about it. For example, going to college, like I stayed in New York. I was just like, you know what, if I'm going to stay in New York City and go to college, I'm going to go to the CUNY school furthest from my house. So it feels like I'm going away for school. So that's how I ended up going to school in Brooklyn. And a lot of times I was just like, damn, I really wish I would have been able to go away to school, like go to like a HBCU or something. But the reality of it is I would be trading my friends, my college experience, and who I am today for a whole different experience that I don't know if I really would have enjoyed to begin with anyway. So it's like I might not be the bruz if I went away to school. So it's like everything that happened the way it was supposed to happen and couldn't have happened any other way. And the fact that we're sitting here having this conversation is all the evidence that proves to it.
So that leads me to our final question or final discussion topic is like, how do we keep this conversation going? Right? Like the young boys earlier this week, the same question was up. It was like, after the lights go out, after the camera goes off, we all got to go back to reality. All right. And the fact that, in their scenario, that reality is as soon as they come back from Thanksgiving break, it's final season. They got to study. They got to get some papers and they got to, like, life happens. As soon as we get off of this, Steve got a test. Nelson got classes. Like, I'm just chilling today, so I'm sorry for y'all. I'm happy for y'all, but I'm sorry for y'all. But how do we keep these conversations going? Like, my goal is to continue to expand these conversations, right? We had the How Black Men's Love. Well, we had the initial iteration of this show, which Steve was on, Russell was on, and we really wanted to understand where we are mentally as Black men, and had an amazing conversation. It was a 3-part series. And then we started that back up again. We talked about depression amongst Black men. We talked about how Black men love. We talked about being vulnerable as a Black man. And now we're talking about, like, are there any good Black men? And I'm really trying to, if you guys notice, the theme here is, we're here. We are human. We are just like everybody else. And we still need to continue to talk about the different sides of us as men, not only just as men, as Black men. And so we're probably going to take December off. But the next set of conversations for me is toxic masculinity, right? That's going to be a tough one. And whoever joins this conversation is going to be willing to have that conversation, because, we have to be able to talk about the things that make us uncomfortable so that we can see and show growth amongst ourselves. So for me, I continue this conversation by keeping this show going, bringing on brothers like yourselves that are willing to talk about topics you're most comfortable with, topics you're okay with being vulnerable on, so that the people that need to hear it. I'll let y'all know, majority of our audience are women, and they're loving the idea of getting some insight into ourselves, because once again, it helps improve the perception of who we are as men, and how we struggle with the things that we struggle with.
I think how you said it best, like, we have to continue to have these conversations, and it doesn't always have to be on this type of platform. Like, we can have these conversations amongst ourselves. And I think I love the fact that the majority of the audience is women, and Black women at that, because I think this serves us as much as it serves them. And it gives them more insight into how we think as Black men, and how it lets them get to know us on a different level. And even though it's just us as Black men talking, these are conversations that we might have had, like, at the barbershop or when we go out to have a drink, that Black women are not privy to. And a lot of it sometimes has to do with the fact that we're not necessarily comfortable speaking this candidly about these topics in front of Black women. And it's not because we have anything against them. It's just, we come from a background, we've been conditioned even to think it's a sign of weakness to be emotional. It's a sign of weakness to be vulnerable. And we've been breaking that mentality by, being vulnerable with each other, going to therapy. All of the things that we've been doing to get to the space we're in now help us. But I think it's just as important that Black women listen to these conversations. And in some cases, we will benefit from bringing them into this conversation, because the three of us, and even including Russell, we can talk about these things. And it's like, we all have different backgrounds. You and I are from the same island, but we still had a different upbringing. And there's an age gap. The same with Steve. Steve is from another hemisphere. But at the end of the day, when we wake up, we are Black men. Before we open our mouths, we are Black men. So we have similar life experiences, and enough that we can look at each other and be like, I see you, dog. Like, and we can talk about things. And a lot of times, like, Steve has said stuff where it's like, all right, well, I don't need to say that anymore because he just put it out there and you just put it out there. So I think we continue these conversations on as many platforms as possible, in as many ways as possible. And I think the biggest thing is getting comfortable having these conversations. Get comfortable having uncomfortable conversations, because it's the only way we're ever going to understand each other as Black men and as Black people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's important. And where do I see this? How do we continue to have this conversation? I think, like I said earlier, it first starts with self, and then next, it starts with each other, like we're doing now. But also it starts with community, and we aren't a community without Black women. So we have to bring them into this conversation, and there's a lot of healing that needs to go on there too, because I think a lot of times when we get Black men and Black women together, it's like we're pitted against one another, and it shouldn't be that way. And I think there are a lot of issues and a lot of problems that we all need to tackle and recognize that the problem is what we're trying to figure out. It's not me versus you. It's not you versus me. And that's important. And in order to do that, we got to speak our truth as Black men. We got to be firm in who we are, to sit there and say what we have to say. And we need to be allotted the space to say that and be listened to when we speak. And listen to understand, and not a sense of listening to respond or defend. And as we're doing that, and if we're asking for that, we have to be willing to do the same.
Right.
Because both perspectives are very important. And we can't know where we're going until we know where we've been and where we're at currently.
Right.
And that's also why we've started the Wellness Collective, right? The Wellness Collective is the inverse of this show. It's a platform for women to kind of really have that specific platform to talk about these particular subjects. And then we have the main show, the Get My Cheese on My Cracker platform, where we both come on the topic, and we both come on the show and have the conversations together. It's interesting that you mentioned having women in this conversation. My co-producer for this show is a men's mental health advocate. She really helps me it's one thing for me to ask the questions to you guys, but I'm always seeking her vantage point to what are some questions from a woman's perspective do you feel like we need to dive into? And I even ask her yo, do you feel like these questions are too surface, right? Am I not diving into too deep? And she was like, no, I think these are a good set of questions. And so I'm always getting her feedback and making sure that I'm creating the best possible show that is not just for us, but these are questions that women would be asking anyway, because there is an opening to the way the man thinks. So with that being said, I love you two brothers for being on. Russ, I love you for jumping on earlier. Brothers, stay on. I want to kind of, talk a little bit more after. For those of you, we're going into Thanksgiving season. Actually, you know what? What are you guys thankful for with this holiday coming in? I know these last couple years has been a lot, and I'm not trying to prolong the show, but what are you guys thankful for this season, this year, this time of being?
You can go first, Steve.
So much. I'm thankful for so much. I'm really thankful for this journey. Like I said, a lot of the seeds that I've planted previously are starting to grow, and I'm starting to see how nurturing them is a huge benefit to me. So I'm definitely grateful for that, and I'm grateful for my lady, man. She puts on. She is seamless, and she's a large reason why I'm evolving the way that I am, the way she challenges me, and the way we have conversations back and forth. So I'm grateful for her in our growth journey, and I'm grateful for the bros, man. 111 is big. You know what I'm saying? Some of my best friends will always be bros, and I appreciate that.
Awesome.
Yeah, I mean, to piggyback off of that, I'm just thankful for where I'm at.
How you doing? I'm okay.
It's been a lot, and this year has been big for me on a personal level and on a I was at your wedding in Morocco. I was thankful to be there, but it's just there's so much I went to Cyprus for my birthday, and I got back here, and I said to someone, "Yeah, I'm back home in Abu Dhabi." And I had to sit there and process the gravity of that statement. Like, you couldn't have told me a year ago I'd be living in Abu Dhabi. So I'm just grateful for my journey, and my tribe. Like, there's so many people who support me, and I think, like, to piggyback off of what Steve said, like, he's grateful for his lady. Like, it's so important to have Black women in your life that support you, like, whether it be a significant other, your best friends, whoever. Like, it's important to nurture those relationships and have Black women in your life that support you, because it makes a huge, like, ain't nobody gonna hype you or support you like a Black woman. We'll just put that like that. Like, the difference between having a Black woman supporting you and not is, like, if somebody told me go move that mountain, I'll be like, all right, I don't know if I could do that. But if I got a Black woman in my corner, my response is going to be, how far do you want me to move it? It's priceless to have supportive Black women in your corner. And I think that's why it's important to have them in these conversations. So I'm thankful for Black women, man, supportive Black women in my life and in general. Like, I think that's one of the biggest things I'm thankful for. But I'm thankful for my journey. I'm thankful for the growth that I've had and the ability to continue to keep growing and to have conversations like this with you brothers.
And I'll close out. Like, I'm thankful for y'all, right? Like, I'm thankful for the show. I'm thankful for Ashley bringing me on to help me refocus my purpose. All right. These last 2 years has been a lot for everybody, and I realize, there's so much healing in conversation. I'm thankful for the fact that I overcame my fear of being in front of the camera, and 2 years later, holding down conversations with people from around the world, talking about from travel to mental health. I mean, you wouldn't have told me prior to the pandemic this would have been my life, right? I'm thankful for my wife, who I met during the pandemic.
Waiting to get that off.
We go through our trials and tribulations. Steve mentioned it earlier, communications is everything. And regardless if we're going through it or not, the fact that we're both willing to work on it and be better because of each other, that's everything to me. So with that being said, you guys out there, I appreciate y'all. For those that stayed this long, continue to work on yourself, protect your peace, stay safe. We out.